All right, so as far as the dev call goes today, it was my understanding we wanted to spend a meat of the discussion talking about concretely what some of the markets that we should be working on top of infrastructure like tractor and wells. So call it, improvements on top of the existing pod market, markets to trade deposits, fertilizer, and the like. But that said, I believe Fushi is here to talk a little bit about what they're working on. And so last Tuesday, we had Mod talking about the Modulent protocol that they're building. Mr. Manifold was sharing some context on what Root has been up to these days. So in that light, perhaps Fushi, if you want to set the scene a little bit as far as what you're working on, how it relates to Beanstalk, and perhaps we can take the discussion from there.
Hi. Yeah, I don't have a million things to share. Thank you for Young Musk for inviting me. But yeah, so I'm working on an MMO called Peromia. I'm gonna send you guys a link, but just so you know, like we haven't launched this publicly yet. I just really love Bean, so I'm giving you guys alpha because I love you. Um, but yeah, I have a lot of pods, and I've been involved in Bean for a long time, kind of from the shadows. But there's basically four ways to create demand for stablecoin that have emerged in the last like 5 or 6 years of DeFi existing. Side chains as a gas token, like XDAI, staking yield like Frax and Saddle Pools, as an institutional on ramp like USDC, or being used to create leveraged positions like DAI is on chain. And I would really like to see more work happening in the Bean ecosystem to create demand for Bean and bring the price above peg and pay back the pod holders. So one of the ways I think to do that is to create to just use it as a currency in more places. Like if we're working on a game, we should use Bean and have people doing business development to say, hey, put Bean into your games, put Bean into literally everything that you possibly can. Uh, so we're doing that, and I also think that a lot of crypto focused MMOs have failed recently or in the past several years because the product was the token, and they spent too much time trying to do token engineering and optimize around the tokens and really just creating yield farms like DeFi kingdoms and others. But if we already have Bean, which works great and is the only stablecoin with no maximum amounts that can be minted, that can meet the only stablecoin that can meet any demand, then all of that is already done for us. And the main engineering left there is one, the UX challenge of microbeans, which I'm happy to talk about a little bit next, and two, the how we want to handle as kind of the Bean community bringing Bean to other chains. And do we want to have an official version of that on Arbitrum, or do we want to have an unofficial version or a wrapped version that goes into microbeans or things like that? So that's kind of the gist of what I have to talk about today. I feel like I just talked for a long time, so I'm going to stop there for now, and if there's any questions or anyone facilitating or wants to jump in.
Holy moly. Holy moly. Insane. Insane. Great alpha. We love you too.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea of what chain you plan on launching the game on?
Arbitrum Nova. Yeah,
Awesome.
so
Go ahead.
it's interesting because I can just bridge beans to Arbitrum, right? But making sure that there's liquidity and that people can actually access it. There's going to be a DEX inside the game that the protocol kind of side of it is collecting fees from. and I would like that bean to be sort of the LP token to pair items with and pair in-game currencies with. So if we can do that, and there's a few different ways. It's either bridging a lot of beans and moving liquidity, or there's some kind of interesting things that I know Mr. Manifold and Young Musk were working on and talking about in terms of the root token and how that could apply to kind of cross-chain apps and things. So for Microbean, kind of the UX thing that I mentioned before is if we're on Arbitrum Nova, the transactions are really cheap. If we put a certain amount of bean for completing a quest, etc., it's going to be like 0.0000007 bean for doing something, and that looks absolute shit in the interface. So the idea of microbean is just bean, 1/1,000,000th of a bean. It's basically a WETH contract, and you just wrap your bean into 1,000,000 microbeans, and that's it. So kind of splitting the beans into a ton of tokens makes the interface look cooler, and then we can have a separate bridge contract where we can just bridge microbeans, and I think there's some kind of interesting, fun stuff there to just like teach people what beans are and how it works, kind of as an education thing. But I'd be into having an official version of that. That Beanstalk Farms or even just the DAO says, yes, this is the official microbean. It's not really like a big deal because it doesn't do very much besides just wrapping the token and making it easier to look in an interface. But that could be a cool thing that we start with and say, what does this go, and does it create enough demand for Bean to be interesting to everybody?
So Solidity already exists without decimals, and thus, as far as the on-chain contract is concerned, when you have one bean, it really is one microbean, and it's only the fact that bean is defined as having 6 decimals, defined as far as there is a function called decimals that returns 6, that this concept of 6 decimals even exists. So from the on-chain realm, being all of these tokens really exist without decimals, and the concept of decimals is something that off-chain clients add to the token to make it more interpretable. So is there any reason why for this microbean implementation, the decimals itself could just be ignored, and thus, one bean becomes one microbean simply because whatever UX is being built on top of the game just chooses not to perform that division by 1e6?
Yeah. So the reason for that is it looks really confusing. If you have in your interface that I own 700 microbeans, and then I go to transfer that somewhere, and if I bring it into Uniswap, if I bring it into any other DEX outside of the interface that we've built for it, then it doesn't say that I have this many microbeans anymore. It says I have 0.000000007 beans, and that is I think really confusing. It's really a UX point of view of how does this affect other people? Do they understand that they control their assets in the game? Do they understand what that asset is? And if we're calling it something different in our interface, and yeah, we could just do that, and it can just be a UI, a UI trick. If you want to do that on the interface, that's fine. But I think it is a little misleading, and it will lead to confusion and people getting phished if it's not a separate token. So that's just kind of my idea there. I understand like it's going to be extra gas, it's going to be extra steps for switching it over, but that can all be automated very easily on the front end, and people don't really have to even think about it. I hope that answers your question. Like I understand the math. It's technically useless. You could just show it however you want, but I do think it is an interesting user experience improvement.
Understood. Um, Forgive my ignorance, but not too familiar with kind of Web3 gaming and kind of how games actually kind of snapshot back to the blockchain in kind of save items and mint items. Would you mind walking us? I mean, I'm reading through your little paragraph here. It says there's going to be monsters, quests, bosses, raids, etc. How does the actual game engine and the blockchain interact in that, say you're fighting a monster, does it somehow snapshot your player health every time you do damage? Does it snapshot after you fought in the monster? If any loot drops, it automatically saves it to the chain. Say you die and lose items, does it save to the chain then? Or kind of how does that all work?
Yeah, so this is also, there's different levels of decentralization and different levels of on-chainness that you can take with these type of projects. And for me to say, oh yeah, everything is on-chain, you can do all this stuff, like, obviously that's not realistic, and I'm not gonna bullshit people and say that it's the most decentralized thing ever. It's being built in Unreal Engine, and the focus here is on ownership and usability, not on decentralizing every aspect of the stack, right? If you're still using, Bean.money as part of DNS, so, DNS is not decentralized. So the part that's
Is it
on chain here is
custodial?
everyone's inventory, and you have the ability to move your coins and move your different assets from your wallet. We're using Web3 Auth and a tool called UseKeep, built on top of Web3 Auth to give everyone social wallets. And non-custodial lives on your device, and then the items in your backpack, the items that you have, and things like that. You have the ability to swap. You have the ability to send to your MetaMask and ownership over your assets. And the organization really controlling the centralized part of it, which is there is a centralized server. There is kind of the standard of how you build MMOs on Unreal Engine. Uh, MMOs like RuneScape and others that you're more familiar with. You can't cheat the server parts of that, where it's checking your health every tick and doing things like that. Um, and I don't believe that there's a way to do that in a decentralized way on chain and still have a clean user experience right now. Maybe there will be in 5 years, and we'll look at it again. But that's kind of the plan. Is the assets are always on chain, and you have the ability to snapshot it or kind of cash out or on ramp or off ramp whenever you choose.
Got it. Thank you for walking us through that. So I guess, kind of to give an example of when some sort of snapshot would happen, you kill a monster, maybe you pick up an item. When that item enters your inventory, the game will then post that to the blockchain
If you want, yeah. I mean, it
if
doesn't
you
have
want.
to do
Got
it
it.
then. It can be when you log out, or
Mhm.
when you choose to go through the interface and move all of these items that are just stored on the server and connected to your backpack locally, and say, okay, put these into my vault, put these into my wallet to save, and that can create a transaction so that you're not having to constantly interrupt your gameplay to sign everything constantly. But if you've ever played RuneScape, you can go kill 100 monsters or 1,000 in an hour. You don't want to make 1,000 transactions every time you pick something up, but you do want to make a transaction to move everything into your bank account once you get back to a bank and once you're ready to kind of snapshot and sync up. So that's kind of the guiding philosophy with that right now.
Very cool. You say here anyone can submit new content directly to the game. Can you walk us through a little bit how you envision that kind of process taking place? Is there kind of an open source, is the code like open source and people are submitting PRs, or is there kind of like a suggestions box that people are suggesting new content to?
Kind of a hybrid right there. Again, nothing is open sourced yet right now because, like I said, we haven't announced it yet. We're planning on announcing and dropping the first version, and the first kind of open source repos for the project, and starting to take alpha, like pre-alpha signups at East Denver. So we'll be around there, and launching the charms claiming will be free and launched at ETH Denver. And then what part of it is open source? There's anyone can make a suggestion, right? You can always make a suggestion, and right now, if you make a suggestion on like a traditional game, like maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but we can use on-chain governance. Like I've contributed to Moloch DAO and other like on-chain governance kind of tools. Like my background is in Solidity development for the last like 6 years, and now we're like a small team of 4 right now. But I'm the only person working full time, so it's going to be like very very bare bones in terms of what is actually in there and what you can add at the beginning. And I think the interesting part is that anyone can add things in a way that it feels like you're modding a game, and we're kind of taking a lot of the moddable libraries that have already been built for Unreal Engine off the shelf, so that we have as little as possible built from scratch, and just take as many like sort of libraries that are extendable as possible, and let people, instead of just suggesting and creating mods, but actually absorb those into the game if governance votes are met. And it's going to be very cool to connect the actual on-chain voting to what content gets pushed into the main repo for the game. And the plan is to use Radical for that right now, but we're still like in such an early stage for that. It hasn't been set up yet. So I hope that answers the question.
Appreciate you walking us through that. This is all very exciting. Looking forward to hear more about the project.
So maybe to comment on the economics a little bit.
Sure.
Fushi, if you're just using the beans in the marketplace, unless the orders themselves, or where the DEX orders, where the assets in the game are being traded against beans, are deposited in the silo, you're not going to easily have yield associated with that going to the users of the system. Whereas if you used like either deposits, so if they were implemented as some sort of 1155, and you used deposits and just didn't even show the users the stock per se, or used roots, either you use deposits or roots, then users or holders of the beans in the system would earn more beans over time, in theory. Is that something that you're trying not to do, or you'd like to incorporate from an economics or a game perspective?
So this is like what Mr. Manifold was talking about before, right? With and working on the roots and stuff, and also why I started posting in the Discord here, because I actually want to have everybody's input, and I think it's actually a really great idea. To, instead of just using the token, why not use the version of it that earns yield for the holders? That's basically the question, right? Like, why use Bean when you could use something that is earning yield for everybody?
Yes, exactly right. That's the question.
All right, let's do it. Show me how to do it. Like, I don't know how Roots works. I checked out the GitHub repo. I haven't read every line of code. Sounds cool. Let me know how we should do it. What's the smartest integration? What other ideas do you have for driving demand for Bean, and not just having it be something that is passively connected to the game, but actually earns yield for the players or creates more demand for Bean. I would love for there to be more DeFi protocols and stuff as part of inside the game beyond just swapping, but also like I said at the beginning, there's kind of this list of potential ways to create yield for for stablecoins. One of those could be creating leveraged positions of in-game assets using Bean, right? And if Bean is our stablecoin of choice for that, and we have a lending protocol, maybe that's an even better way to create more yield for Bean. So I'm in for any of that, and I'd love help or more ideas working on any of those things.
Well, would just say that the way that all of the tech that we've been working with Root and with Modulend on building is designed to make doing that type of stuff as easy as possible. Now, it's not all going to be ready in the next couple months, but yeah, hopefully over the next year, let's call it, anything that you want to do along those lines can be facilitated in the game. So that's very cool. If we want to sit on the economics just for a little bit and dive a little deeper, the two ways at this point that you could realistically do the integration in such a way where there was a way to accrue yield would be to, I mean, well, maybe there's three. There's a Beanstalk level upgrade where any beans that are trading against assets in your game can be whitelisted for deposit, and therefore probably your game could just be deposited. Maybe Publius, you could correct me if I'm wrong on that, but maybe it could be facilitated where the game itself is whitelisted. So any of the, I guess that would also require the deposits to exist on the layer 2. So the much simpler integration would be to send like the assets that already have yield to the layer 2. Just thinking out loud here. So probably bridge either deposits, bridge Bean deposits as 1155s, or bridge roots. Yeah, those would probably be the two best options. Bridge deposits, so a Bean deposit, or bridge roots to Arbitrum in your case, and then have it such that people can trade against the Bean deposits or trade against the roots. Now, roots are ERC20, which would probably be simpler to start with. But on the other hand, depending on your timeline, maybe it makes sense to do a little bit more groundwork and try to facilitate using deposits directly, because that's something that will ultimately have to be done. But that's probably an open question for the devs.
Yeah, I'm willing to spend some time looking into that more. You lost me a little bit with the different token standards and that was like a lot of information. But if you want to write some of that down or hop on with me one-on-one, I'd happily go through any of that and whatever we can do to make it so that we're driving the more demand for Bean, whatever asset from Beanstalk farms, and there's a million fucking assets now. And I say that with love in my heart. But whichever one we should use, let me know, and let's make it happen. And just to like add on there for like timeline things. I know you said something's not going to be ready for 2 months. Like we're in like very early stages. The first like real playable version of this is probably not going to be up until close to the end of this year. And I will be providing updates and as we're going here, starting with the launch at ETH Denver. But game development takes a lot longer than DeFi development, where you can just publish a contract. So
are the tokens in your game going to be 1155s?
Some of them will be. There's basically five tokens.
Oh, you're giving us shit for having too many tokens?
I know. No, it's not shit. I said there's love in my heart.
It's all love,
not
brother.
shit.
It's all love.
I love it.
It's all love.
I truly do.
All love.
It's all love. It's all love.
I know. Just ball busting. Go ahead.
Okay. So there's five tokens. One of them is a secret. And then the other 4 are one being microbeam, just to have something that is stable inside the game. Charms, which are 1155. Magic is an ERC 20, and Thaler is it's ERC 20, but it's non-tradable. It's like shares in a Moloch DAO, or I guess stock, kind of similar to that. But
So you're gonna have
it's
gonna have
in the
ERC 20s,
interface.
1155s, and then are you also gonna have 721s, even if you can't tell us about them?
Probably not. Probably not. If there's other like semi-fungible things and items in the game, then there most likely be 1155, just to save gas on transfers and
Great.
just be more flexible.
Fascinating. So, I mean, from that perspective, you'd probably want to do it as either the 2 options are a deposit marketplace where you're trading bean deposits against all of these assets. So it would be 1155 against 1155 or 1155 against ERC20. And that could probably be done through Tractor, or you could use Roots, which are a wrapper for deposits, and that would be ERC20 against 1155 and ERC20 against ERC20. So
Right.
there's some question as to, you can sort of pick. I think it's worth diving a little bit deeper into the economic implications of what you're offering users, or maybe ultimately offering users. You probably don't want to offer users both. You probably want to guide them towards a single experience. So maybe it's just worth spending a little time now talking about the different economic implications of the way Root works, and how that compares to deposits, if you would find that helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I'm also not really worried about, is it easy to trade 1155 for 20, or vice versa? And basically the plan here is just to use the Seaport contracts, which has a version, has a basic order offering for switch for between ERC20 to 721, 1155. It has every version, so there's no reason we can't just use all on one contract and just use that as a DEX too. So I'm not super worried about different token standards clashing, as long as we're kind of using the main 3 there.
So Publius, would you? Yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, would just say that kind of on the deposit side, there becomes this issue of, how do you plant or mow from a layer 2? If the goal, think in the long run, this is going to be a problem that's going to come up more and more as more, products in the Bean ecosystem grows and expands to layer 2s. So ultimately that will require a lot of kind of jiggering at the protocol level to make that possible. On the Root side, Root is kind of a yield-bearing ERC20 token, and if the goal was to kind of create this microbean token, which represents some fractional stable value, a very easy way to do it would just, while still allowing it to accrue yield, would just be to wrap the Root token in a microbean contract that just rebases based on the number of roots, and therefore has convertibility directly with Bean, through the Root token. And that way it's like you have some microbean balance that's increasing over time. You log back into the game, it can say, you earned 2 million microbeans since you last logged on or something. But think the deposit methodology is going to be quite complicated to get started with, and but that's not to say it is the most probably efficient option, as it maintains direct exposure to the actual underlying asset. So if you are interested in that approach, would be happy to talk more. And it's just important to note that it would require kind of significant modifications at the protocol level to support cross-chain planting and cross-chain mowing, or cross virtual machine.
No, it's a really good question. Like, if the ownership and the governance and all this stuff is happening on one chain, how can you mow on mainnet? And I don't think there's any particular reason that there can't be a contract deployed on mainnet who only has two functions, and one of them is to mow on behalf of all the users. And if that contract is the microbean wrapper, then there's no particular reason that can't own all the beans on mainnet as they're wrapped, and the only thing that it can do is mow and send the yield on to the other chain. So I don't think really a wrapper there is very complex. I'm sure you and I together could figure that out in an hour. But it's a really good question, and I think it will be really cool to see some more experiments as Bean kind of grows and goes multi-chain of how people choose to deal with that. And I'm totally down to work on some prototypes together if you want, just not even for Peromia, but just in general for how do you mow from other places and do so autonomously and permissionlessly.
Just would say that, like, if it is some wrapper contract, then inherently the user no longer has direct exposure to the underlying deposit. From my understanding, this is pretty much how the root token works, where it serves as sort of like an aggregator, where now pretty much everyone owns some fractional share of the same shared account to allow it to be easily composable and fungible, removing the need for anyone to mow or plant at the individual level. And it introduces this kind of collective farming where everyone is kind of sharing the same silo account and has some fractional ownership of that. So if that is the goal, and to provide simplicity through some sort of microbean token, think leveraging the existing root contract would be great to prevent kind of duplication of that work.
Okay, and are you saying that's not ideal for some reason? Because
no, I'm saying
that's
that
pretty much how I've always kind of thought about yield farm. A DAO is on one chain, but it wants to yield farm on another, and we'll just deploy a wrapper that owns everything, and all it can do is send the profits across the bridge to the DAO or what have you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Not saying it's not ideal. It certainly works. There was just like one small caveat, which might not really matter to users, and how much it matters to certain people varies. And that caveat is, once you introduce this kind of collective farming, now users no longer have direct exposure to the exact deposits. So if me and you are combining a deposit, say your deposit season 4,000, I have a deposit in season 5,000, now we collectively combine them and mint some sort of proportional share token. First off, how many tokens do we mint to each other? In this instance, you having an older deposit would be contributing more grown stock to the pool than I am. However, we're contributing the same amount of BDV. As stock is a non-fungible token that really doesn't have any sort of price tag, it's hard to kind of determine, should you get more of this proportional share token, or should we get the same? How does this wrapper token denominate the BDV of the contract? And if you get more because you have an older deposit, why would I ever contribute my later deposit when the underlying value of the deposit in terms of beans is the same? So it ultimately, introduces several different problems, where it's like, either direct exposure is maintained to kind of the exact deposit, but kind of, or it's like we somehow take some sort of average and one of us gets penalized. Either you get penalized, you don't get the benefit of that extra grown stock, or I get penalized in the fact that I don't get a direct mapping to the actual BDV. Deposits are most similar to an 1155 token because there is this one variable etched into the token, which is how much grown stock have you accrued on top of it. So just the nature in an ERC20 token is obviously a single token where there's kind of no variable associated with the token. So just the nature of reducing some one-dimensional token where there's one dimension on which it can vary, being the ID in the case of a deposit, the season, into a token where, like an ERC20 token, where there's no dimension on which it varies. There's a single token. Inherently there's going to be some sort of loss of ownership, such that you lose that direct exposure. But it should be noted that it's unclear, how actually impactful that is, and I think Root has done a really good job of trying to make it as fair as possible while still maintaining scalability. In a sense that I believe the way the new Root token works is, when you convert Root back to Bean, you automatically you get the worst deposit that Root has, such that existing token holders are not necessarily taken advantage of. The worst deposit in terms of the lowest grown stock. And when it's minted, it mints deposits based on the BDV. So again, think it's a great system and it works very well. There is that little bit of loss, and it's kind of a very small caveat that could be considered quite marginal, but it depends on who you're asking.
No, it's nuanced. I hadn't really considered that. So thank you for bringing up the difference between the wrapper and giving everyone a proportional amount there. It would be super simplified to just use Bean, and then you don't have to worry about what time that Bean was minted or the differences in stock. So yeah, it's definitely will be a balance between keeping it as simple as possible just to get it out and ship a prototype really soon. But I'm happy to talk more about that, and I definitely don't want to penalize anyone for joining later, right?
Totally. And would just say, if, from a simplicity perspective, would argue that using Root is, marginally more difficult than using Bean, in the sense that, in both cases, you're dealing with an ERC20 token. So, if, to keep things simple, it might, it would probably by using Root, you still allow users of your game to have access to kind of silo yield over time, and wouldn't have to overcomplicate things by getting involved with, managing deposits as 1155s. So just would say at the very minimum, would recommend using Root for that purpose. But, again, ultimately, it's up to you. And, if it makes sense to use Bean, it makes sense to use Bean.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
thank you for all that. Are there any other final questions for me, or I don't want to take all the time. I don't know what other dev topics there are today.
You guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, first off, there's no rush whatsoever. In fact, I feel like the one of the point of these calls is for these types of like Beanstalk developer problems to be hashed out in a public setting, such that they can be considered and answered collectively, and we can all get on the same page about where we're at. So there's no rush here whatsoever from our perspective, and this is great content. And appreciate you very much for being open to discussion. It's very exciting. Would say that based on what you said and your version of like simple versus elegant way to do this sort of wrapper, definitely think it probably makes sense to take a serious look at Root, particularly the new Root token. Not sure if they have a new white paper dropping soon describing the implementation, or exactly where the best documentation is on the new Root token that's under audit, but think it would be probably pretty in line with what you've been talking about. And from that perspective, then the question becomes how to best facilitate a market for ERC20 against ERC20 and ERC20 against 1155 for the decks for your game. And maybe just want to spend a minute talking about OpenSea versus Tractor, because there's been a lot of work going into building an extension of Depot and Pipeline that effectively allows for multi-party transactions. And I think that in practice, the implementation of a DEX like you're describing is probably within the scope of Tractor development in terms of the timeline that you've been talking about for your game. So maybe Publius, would you just talk a little bit about Tractor versus OpenSea and what might make sense given what Fushi's building?
Yeah, just to add one thing there before you do. I don't want to interrupt, but it's not OpenSea, right? Seaport is a protocol on its own.
Excuse me,
Right?
not
There's
OpenSea.
there's no
Seaport,
fees.
100%.
There's no fees to
100%.
OpenSea. Just for the record of people listening, it's on chain. Anyone can deploy it anywhere and use it how they like.
Great correction. Apologies.
Thank you.
Yeah, so appreciate you bringing that up, Fushi. Tractor is very loosely based on Seaport. The inspiration from Tractor comes from kind of Seaport and really thinking about, what currently does Seaport allow? Seaport currently allows users to exchange at least one of ERC20, 1155, or 721, the three main on-chain token standards for at least one of those three standards. And it creates a very generalized interface for exchanging value on chain, where in our kind of research, where we've discovered Seaport is noticeably lacking in its ability to extend functionality beyond base asset transfers. There is a demand to be able to do more than just exchange ERC20 tokens in in some fulfillment of an order. So what Tractor does is it takes everything that's possible in Seaport is possible with Tractor, but Tractor provides access to pipeline through the ability to add pipe calls, such that as a part of this transaction where value is being transferred, the fulfillment, the order can have access to pretty much all of DeFi. So say I wanted to, say you wanted to exchange, you wanted to, sell a plot for beans, and you only want beans, and I have a bean deposit. I could fulfill your Tractor order with, like some sort of withdrawal. Let's assume the withdrawal time 0. I could fulfill your order with a withdraw and send you beans, such that you receive beans, but at the start of the transaction, I didn't have beans at all. I'm performing this withdraw action in order to get beans, and that can be encoded in the order. This also helps with complex pricing and kind of variable constraints on when orders are valid. One common use case that's brought up a lot is exchanging pods for deposits. Really unlocking the liquidity that's locked in the silo to have access to a variety of financial markets. And let's assume deposits implement some 1155 interface. On Seaport, it is my understanding that when you create an order to buy an 1155 contract, you just specify which IDs through the use of some Merkle proof or Merkle tree to specify which 1155s you're willing to accept. Now, in the case of deposits and someone selling a plot for deposits, they may want to price grown stock somehow, such that if I have two deposits, one has an extra 20% grown stock, you may be willing to accept less of the deposit with grown stock than the deposit with, less grown stock. And so some kind of arbitrary pricing function can be encoded into Tractor such that you can have some kind of y equals mx plus b, where b is the price, the value, what you're willing to value the BDV at, and x is the amount of grown stock, and m is inherently the price of grown stock you're willing to accept. On the pod side, you may you now want to determine the user is buying some amount of your plot, and you may want to price that plot differently based on what part they're buying. again, through Tractor, you can encode some generalized pricing function that, perhaps also has some y equals mx plus b format, or some power format, or some polynomial format, whatever is desired. But you can encode different parts of the plot to be priced at different places. But kind of just in general, it extends. So I guess not sure how coherent that was, but gave it a good effort. But in general, the idea behind Tractor is to do everything that Seaport can do and more by extending the functionality for which an order can be comprised of to anything on chain within DeFi. That being said, Tractor's current state is that it's there's some pre-release version ready for kind of review and testing, with the hope to get that into audit sooner rather than later. But most of the development focus seems to be on Wells for now. Now, to talk about the big problem with systems like Tractor and Seaport is that there's no on-chain order book solution. Now, it is my understanding that Seaport runs some sort of centralized order book that exists on some server that they own, and orders are in the form of EIP 712 signatures for both Seaport and Tractor. And there needs to be some sort of order book which takes in all of the orders, determines whether they're valid or not, and then reports that back to the UI. Obviously, the UI can do it itself, but there does seem to be a fair amount of nuanced computation in there. So curious from your perspective, Fushi, have you thought much about kind of the order book problem and how that relates to Seaport, or how are you thinking about handling that? And no worries if you haven't quite got there. Just curious to see where you guys are at.
I mean, that was really cool. Thank you for the overview about Tractor. Like you said, it's just kind of getting started, and most of the focus is on Wells right now, I think. So I haven't I'm not familiar with Tractor or what it does. I am very familiar. I was in the code arena for Seaport during their audit, and so I'm much more familiar with that. I do think a lot of the things you've mentioned are already possible with Seaport. For example, unlocking beans or having some equivalent that you unlock the beans on chain and then give someone beans at the end of their order. I think you can do a lot of that with a custom zone. Now that zones have hooks in Seaport 1.2. So my preference on creating a stable, scalable product is going to be use Seaport that already has billions of dollars of volume going through it and has already been audited by literally everyone in the whole world who knows how to do an audit, and has just a higher level of security right now. And if there's custom versions of that, or custom code in Tractor on top of the basic Seaport order flow stuff, it's cool. We can talk about that, but I mean, I think for such a core feature, it's going to be pretty unlikely that we use any code before it's been audited very heavily, and really proven itself the way that Seaport has. And then to just where do you do the order book? To be determined. It's super easy to do it off chain on just a serverless, even as simple as a Vercel app. It's incredibly easy, and there's already a Seaport SDK and these JavaScript libraries that make doing that incredibly easy, and you don't really have to think about it. Or I can just give that to a junior front end developer, and I don't even have to teach them anything about Web3 because the JavaScript libraries are already built. So a lot of kind of what I'm thinking there is just how do we get to market faster and give everybody the powers and tools of DeFi and Web3 in an actually fun game. And I want to spend as little time as possible thinking about the DeFi aspects and let Bean do the stablecoin for us, let Seaport do the marketplace for us, and spend as much time as possible making a fun game. So in terms of decentralizing the order book, I don't have a plan for that right now. If someone wants to contribute and convince the future community of Peromia that we need to decentralize the order book and come up with a solution for that, cool. Like that's something that we can do. But like the timeline on that is not probably soon. And I'm never gonna like pretend and say that like we're gonna decentralize this whole stuff, and I don't think that's honest to say. I don't know any NFT marketplace that's successful right now that has a decentralized order book. But maybe we'll start to see some of those in 2023, I hope.
So, not too familiar with Seaport zones, but
Sure.
looking into their documentation right now, it seems like zones contain a view function that determines whether the order is valid. Kind of the problem that Tractor is trying to solve is generic function execution, view or non-view. I guess could you walk us through, first off, is that understanding of zones correct in that it only allows execution of view functions, or is there some other way through Seaport to perform generalized execution?
Yes. So in the Seaport that's deployed right now that everyone's using is like 1.1, and it only supports what is shown in their docs, which is that one view function. And then in the next version in 1.2 that is done, but I don't think it's been deployed yet. Maybe like their code arena for that finished this past week, like literally a few days ago, I think. Then it adds to the zone a external function that you can make arbitrary calls. So you could do something that's like, oh, the zone just checks the order. Right now, the zone just says, yes, this order is valid. I'm not paused. And if there's a protocol issue or a security vulnerability, you can pause the zone and have that function, that view function, return false, and then or throw an error, and then that will stop orders that are using that as a zone from completing. But there is a new added way. I'm just pulling up their docs right now, and I think they're a little behind on it, to be honest. But there is like an arbitrary execution there, so you could reward someone, one NFT marketplace, one looks rare token for every volume of ETH, for every one ETH going through your marketplace, or arbitrary things like that. So I think you could just call Mo or call whatever you needed there. I'm like fairly certain you could do that inside of while the order is executing. I don't know what the gas for that would look like, if it would be too crazy though. But it's something to look at.
Yes, definitely appreciate you bringing up this to us. I mean, if Seaport can already do everything we need it to do, then that is fantastic, and great news. As it doesn't have to all be done internally. I guess probably on this end going to have to spend some more time looking at it, but from what you're saying, it seems like it would be possible to do something like transfer some ERT20 tokens to a zone, and then through this generalized function execution do something like deposit into Aave as collateral, take out a
Right.
loan, and then transfer that loan to you.
Yeah.
Awesome. And that zone could
that's
even
basically
be
what I'm saying.
pipeline itself. So which would be awesome. So if everything you're saying is true, like that's great news as far as I'm concerned, and think it's very relevant to what's been discussed on the last few dev calls. And it now seems like going to have to do a deep dive into this contract. And I really appreciate your thoughts here. To make sure that to see if Seaport supports everything that is intended to be supported through Tractor. And all that really, from our perspective, needs to be handled is some sort of generalized execution flow, such that any value in your account can be unlocked to perform any sort of action within DeFi, and for that to be properly permissioned by both parties involved in the order. As well as proper, allocating to the message to the person who created the function or created the order. One thing that Tractor can do is copy and paste call data from the message.sender address into the order so that it can perform some sort of variable execution logic on that front. And we just need to make sure that there's some way to, I guess, so the zone address and the function call, that the user, that is a part of the order, that's input by the person, that's specified by the person creating the order.
Right. Yes.
And
All the fees, everything like that is when you create the order. So that's stored off chain for most NFT marketplaces right now.
totally. Awesome. And what if somewhere in that call data, wanted to, some in this generic function call wanted to set one of the addresses to be the person fulfilling the transaction?
Yes.
Would that be possible?
Look, I don't have the code in front of me right now. I would have to
Okay, no worries at all.
that.
No worries. But really
But
appreciate
I
you
just
bringing.
posted in the barnyard chat. Zero Age, who's like the architect for Seaport, posted a thread like 10 days ago, or 2 weeks now, I guess, about more powerful zones and being able to make stateful calls after token transfers. So that's like probably a good starting place if you're interested in learning more there. But yeah, in terms of like how that relates to Peromia, it's super early to start talking about that particular implementation and how we're going to handle that.
Totally. And appreciate you kind of giving us that context. And also, just in general, the only reason Tractor is being created is because, Seaport, its predecessor, was not properly generalized to be able to do anything. And now hearing that there might be a Seaport version that does what Tractor intends to do, is great news.
Yeah.
So,
Save everybody engineering hours,
Exactly. That's the goal of, kind of building a properly composable on-chain, tech stack. And, really, really excited to hear that, Seaport has been pushing that kind of forward. So, definitely personally need to do some looking into these contracts and, would appreciate it if, other developers on this call would do the same and really just kind of look into the logic of Seaport and truly see if everything someone could possibly want to do within a transaction is possible within this Seaport 1.2 update. Because, and if so, being able to leverage their existing, developer documentation, their existing SDK would be, a huge leap, for the ecosystem overall. So appreciate you bringing this to all of our attentions.
Yeah, happy to. Fun conversation, actually.
So to summarize, on the economics front, I think it probably makes the most sense for you to use Roots. And then on the order book side, this Seaport 1.2 sounds like a wonderful solution. So hopefully this is some clarity on some of the stuff you raised. Do we want to talk about like a dedicated Arbitrum bridge for Roots? What would
Yeah,
it
I mean,
look
there's
like?
already
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
Arbitrum bridge, right? Like you can just send things across, whatever you want. Roots is
Well, perhaps maybe I misunderstood your question around some sort of like DAO ratified version of a microbean. Are you talking about something other than like an approved wrapper on Arbitrum, or what was it that you were hoping to get like ratification of?
Yeah, I don't have an agenda for that. I just have this is something we're gonna have microbean. It's gonna be some kind of wrapped bean asset. It's gonna be on Arbitrum Nova. What do you think about that? And I'm really just here for feedback and to just like tell the ideas. But I don't have a particular plan. I don't. I'm posting about Peromia and Mr. Manifold and Young Musk and other Bean community members are encouraging me to join this call and learn more there. I think it would be really cool if we had a microbean wrapper and it was linked somewhere in the bean.money docs, and we said, hey, this is like the official microbean of Arbitrum Nova, and like there's only one way to do that, right? If we have an official token and we use the standard bridge, it will create whatever address it creates. I don't know if it's deterministic or create to or what, but yeah, I don't I don't
mean,
have
to this
any
point,
particular proposal, but
yeah, to
yeah.
this point, what you're really looking for is some sort of rebasing version of root. So root becomes this ERC20 wrapper, uh, and then you're trying to then rebase the wrapper effectively to a stable
Uh,
denomination so that people earn more microbeans over time.
well, I think that's something that one of the other Fluvius has suggested today.
Well, I'm also suggesting it now. Like, I
Okay,
think that is
great.
what would make
Let's do
sense.
it. All right, yeah. If you think that makes the most sense, that's really helpful feedback for me.
Yeah, because then you can offer like everything is denominated in microbeans when people go to like either exit the system or just redeem into Beanstalk in whatever capacity. Like they'll have the beans that they thought they had, and there is some notion of friction around leaving the root system based on the way the root contracts are currently architected, but to some extent that would probably just add a little bit of friction on leaving your game in practice. We can dive a little bit deeper into some of the economics around that if you think like a marginal stock cost to leave the ecosystem entirely is, but stay within Beanstalk is too high of a marginal cost. But frankly, based on the way you've described the user experience that you're trying to create, I don't think it would be meaningful. Assuming that's the case, feel like this is like pretty much definitely the right way to go forward. And then there's just a question as to getting some sort of development from the Beanstalk side if necessary, or to help you out with the rebasing. But it should be pretty basic.
Okay, I'm glad you think all of that is basic. Oh, it's great.
Well, it's all relative,
Yeah. It's
I don't
definitely a
don't write
balance.
any of the code, so maybe it's one of those blissfully ignorant issues.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
So on the bridging fund, believe that root is currently on regular Arbitrum. I think it was part of the Paradox thing,
Right.
but believe it was just bridged directly over using the Arbitrum standard bridge, where it does deploy some like canonical token at some deterministic address. There was kind of one problem that came up though, and that's it didn't seem like the Arbitrum native bridge, and I guess not sure how much this actually matters for token deployment, probably not at all, but there was some problem where the Arbitrum native bridge would not allow you to one, set the address, the recipient address of the bridge, and two, execute some sort of on-chain function after the tokens were bridged. And where this functionality was kind of desired was the ability to perform some kind of cross virtual machine transaction where someone who holds ETH on layer one may want to, using pipeline, swap that ETH into root, on layer one, send that root into the bridge, and then upon receiving the roots on the other side, have those roots go directly into a pipeline contract on Arbitrum, and then the bridge would kind of follow that up with some kind of hook where it would call pipeline to then place a bet and transfer the bet tokens to the user's address. And upon reflecting on it as I'm talking, don't think this has any impact on the actual token implementation, and thus don't think it would warrant not using the Arbitrum native bridge to bridge root and or bean over to Arbitrum Nova. But I guess the question becomes kind of, is there any desire or need to use a custom implementation on Arbitrum instead of the implementation that is provided by the bridge.
That's
And
why that's another
go ahead.
reason that having a wrapper for microbean, if that is deployed on Nova, then you can just bridge whatever assets on the basic bridge. And yeah, the contract that they deploy is kind of vanilla and shitty, but you can just wrap it into microbean that has whatever other features, whatever other flexibility and extendability that you need. So I think that's another point in favor of like actually having another token that whatever bean asset we want to bridge over actually gets wrapped into something else. Sorry, I hope that makes sense.
Yes, totally makes sense. Unfortunately, not too familiar with Arbitrum's implementation of the ERC20 token, so I'm not too familiar with its functionality. But yeah, agree that if there were some microbean implementation, any sort of custom functionality desired for this token to have could be implemented at that token level, and the canonical root token could be that basic implementation deployed by the Arbitrum bridge, and customizability could be built, introduced at the microbean level.
Right.
Why wouldn't the microbean contract be deployed on mainnet to wrap roots on mainnet, and then it could also then just be bridged over?
Well, I think Bluebius #2 was saying, maybe you want custom features there. Maybe you want to be able to call multiple contracts at the time that you bridge it over. So, but instead of doing that at the time that you bridge it over, it could be at the time that you wrap, right? And then you're calling, get this from the bridge, call this DEX, whatever you want there.
Fushi, do you know if you can kind of have the Arbitrum bridge use a custom solution, or does the main Arbitrum bridge only allow deployment of their kind of custom contract? For instance, if a microbean implementation was deployed on both Arbitrum and Nova and mainnet,
Right.
such that it's up to the user, do they want to perform this wrapping on mainnet or Arbitrum Nova, would there somehow be some way to link those two contracts through the bridge?
I don't know about that, but I seriously doubt that there is. I can ask the Arbitrum biz dev folks that are kind of like helping us a bit about if there's a possibility to do that. There definitely is not the ability to do that if you just do like the regular bridge, like just their standard send a token across Arbitrum for the first time. But I don't know if it would be possible if we asked them for help. Yeah, I kind of doubt it, but it's possible, I guess. Maybe I can
Yeah,
ask
I mean,
and get back to you on
curious.
that one.
Yeah, that would be appreciated. I mean, curious to know what kind of USDC and Tether, have done. I
Right.
mean, imagine USDC is going to need a custom contract on every chain, as blacklisting is one of the functions they need to be able to support. So then that would either imply that all the USDC that's being bridged is using some alternative bridge. And maybe that's what Arbitrum's solution is kind of,
A really
create
good
your
point.
own custom gateway for that. But yeah, definitely something to look into and explore. Because from this perspective, the best user interface for Microbean would be to be able to wrap it on either side, because it's just the most functional.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the most and gives the most power and flexibility to the user, which is the entire goal is that you actually own your assets and have that kind of flexibility. I do have to run in 3 minutes. But thank you for all the questions and stuff. Was there any like final thoughts for me or anything else that I can help with?
I mean, on this end, think this was an incredibly productive conversation, and hopefully will serve as kind of think a lot of kind of kind of the philosophy of how Beanstalk kind of you know, spreads its roots across, you know, different chains and virtual machines is, you know, a very challenging problem. So appreciate you taking the time today to come discuss that with us and kind of start to ideate about different solutions that, you know, Beanstalk, you know, and Bean can use in order to achieve that. And, you know, really, really excited to hear about, you know, your project that you're working on, and, you know, appreciate you coming on the call today.
Yeah, thank you, and I really appreciate the feedback and ideas from everybody, really. So thank you for the time and giving me the chance to ask a few questions too.
Would just comment that it would be great to have you come back in a couple weeks and continue this conversation once you have like more answers to some of the questions that have been asked today, and we can just continue to publicly figure things out together, whether that's in a week or two,
Yeah.
whenever you feel like you want to do that. But from our perspective, this is exactly what these dev calls are supposed to be used for, and really appreciate you coming here and just chopping it up with us and figuring some stuff out.
Yeah, thank you. And also, this is the first time that we've had any public event or anything for Peromia. So everybody listening, you're in the front row.
Cheers,
So
brother.
it's kind of
Cheers.
exciting for me, to be honest.
Congratulations.
Yes,
Congratulations.
thank you. And we're building in the open. Like I said, we're gonna launch the first kind of iteration of a few parts of the economics and the tokens and a few things at ETH Denver. So be on the lookout for that. And we're building in the open. Things will be open sourced as soon as they're available, and I will be sharing updates.
Cool. Will you be at ETH Denver?
I will be under another pseudonym. So
Oh my goodness.
I don't know if you guys are all going to be wearing, it'll be a bunch of guys in bean costumes all with the same name tag, and we'll see what you guys look like. But I'll be
Brilliant.
around. Hit me up.
Brilliant. All right. Well, hopefully we'll see you there.
I hope so. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, brother.
Thanks, Fushi.
All right. On this end, don't feel like it really makes sense to get started on another topic. That, the goal of these conversations is to really get really deep into something and not have a time limitation. So, we've been running for 90 minutes and probably, want to call it here unless people have certain things they wanted to talk about or discuss. But don't think it makes sense to necessarily have a full conversation about markets, and we can just save it till next dev call.
Agreed here. All right, why don't we call it there then? Unless anyone has any objections. Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, thanks everyone.
I guess on this end, just would say,
ahead.
The point Fushi made about Seaport 1.2 is, very interesting, and, think, kind of how these markets are ultimately implemented, are, going to be shaped, by, kind of by whether or not, it seems like that, this new Seaport update is capable of supporting all the functionality that will be desired. But, it's really exciting to hear that, kind of, there are other teams working out there working on kind of general composability, which is quite exciting.
Agreed, very exciting. Well, nothing else. I think we can wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for coming. Take it easy.